Money was supposed to be the great liberator. That was the promise, the quiet myth we inherited without question. Work hard, save enough, climb just a little higher each year, and one day the system would reward you. But look around. That promise has collapsed so completely that it feels almost delusional to remember it existed at all. What we call money no longer behaves like the tool we were taught to trust. It behaves like something alive, something engineered to slip through our fingers the moment we reach for it. Because the truth is brutal. The system was never built to make you wealthy. It was built to keep you running. You can see it in every failed attempt to catch up. Prices rise faster than paychecks. Debt multiplies faster than savings. Entire generations work longer hours, only to end up further behind. We pretend it's a temporary setback, a rough economy, a bad year. But deep down, most people know it's structural. They feel the drain. They feel the pressure. They feel the silent theft happening in real time. And yet, they keep chasing. Because stopping would mean confronting an unbearable reality. The game was rigged before they were even born. Money today functions like a dissolving substance. What you earn evaporates quietly, invisibly, without warning. Inflation is the polite word for it, a word that makes the wound sound almost harmless. But inflation is not an accident. It is not weather. It is decay, built into the architecture of modern finance. And that decay punishes the same people over and over again. Savers, workers, families who follow the rules, the very individuals the system claims to protect. As the purchasing power of a currency collapses, the illusion collapses with it. The savings account that once felt secure becomes a slow-motion trap. The retirement plan becomes a placeholder for dreams that will never materialize. Every milestone drifts further away. Every future projection gets rewritten with darker ink. People don't notice it in a single day, but they feel it over years, like a tightening grip around the throat. All collapsing systems share the same early warning signs: rising desperation, widening inequality, increasing dependence on credit, political promises that sound more like sedatives than solutions. You see them everywhere now. A society that used to move forward step by step suddenly feels like it's walking on a treadmill controlled by someone else, someone you cannot see, someone who never seems to lose. And as the system shakes, something strange happens. Money becomes louder and more chaotic, yet simultaneously emptier. Numbers get bigger. Trillion-dollar budgets, trillion-dollar debts. But the average person feels smaller. Their lives shrink. Their options shrink. Their time shrinks. And the louder the machine roars, the more powerless they feel inside it. There is a moment in every collapse when the public senses that the story they were told no longer matches the world they're living in. That moment is now. You can feel it in conversations at dinner tables, in the rising panic of people who realize their savings can't outrun the speed of decay, in the eerie normalization of economic instability. People don't say it out loud, but they feel betrayed, and betrayal always precedes awakening. Money was never meant to make you rich. It was meant to keep you compliant. The system doesn't collapse because it failed. It collapses because it succeeded at doing exactly what it was designed to do: extract, exhaust, and control. And once you see that, the ground beneath your feet begins to shift. Because if the doom is already here, if the collapse is not a future event, but a present condition, then the real question is no longer what happened to our money, but who built a system where this outcome was inevitable? History does not repeat itself in perfect circles. It repeats in spirals, returning to the same destination but on a higher, more complex level. And every time a civilization rises, stabilizes, and begins to fracture, the fault line is almost always the same. It's money. Empires don't collapse because their armies grow weak. They collapse because their currencies rot from within. And that rot always follows a pattern so precise, so predictable, that it feels less like a mistake and more like a script. The pattern begins with confidence. Every ruling class understands that before you control people, you must first control what they trust. Rome did it with silver denarii. China did it with early paper notes. Medieval kingdoms did it with royal mints. Modern nations do it with central banks. The symbols change, the materials change, the flags change, but the architecture of power remains the same. Whoever controls the money controls the world built on top of it. But trust is never enough for long. Wealth is tempting, and rulers rarely resist the temptation. So the second stage begins: debasement. In Rome, emperors shaved the silver content of coins, replacing it with cheap metals, while keeping the face value the same. In ancient China, officials printed notes faster than the economy could absorb them. In Europe, kings quietly reduced the metal in their coinage to fund wars, palaces, and the endless machinery of power. Every era believes it is doing something new, yet every era performs the same sleight of hand: create more money than there is real wealth to back it. And once the money weakens, the people weaken. That is the third stage: dependence. When savings lose value, citizens turn to loans. When wages fall behind prices, they turn to credit. Debt becomes a substitute for prosperity, and rulers learn that indebted subjects are far easier to manage than independent ones. In Rome, citizens became dependent on grain doles funded by debased currency. In medieval kingdoms, peasants worked entire lifetimes to pay off obligations imposed by rulers who controlled the mint. In early modern China, paper money inflation hollowed out the middle class and pushed families into generational poverty. The fourth stage arrives quietly but violently: collapse. Not always in the dramatic way history books portray. Sometimes it's slow, like wood eaten from the inside by termites. But eventually, the currency buckles under its own contradictions. Rome's denarius became worthless. China's early paper systems dissolved into chaos. European monarchies triggered revolutions by destroying the value of their own money. When the medium of exchange dies, so does the illusion of stability it once supported. And through it all, something eerie becomes clear. The people in power always survive. Even in collapse, the pattern favors them. They own land. They hold hard assets. They control institutions. They simply shift into whatever new monetary system emerges afterward. It is the ordinary citizens who pay the cost, always. This is the pattern: currency, debasement, dependence, collapse. A closed loop that has shaped every major civilization, every rise and fall, every transfer of power. What makes the pattern terrifying is not that it exists, but that it works. It has survived thousands of years because it reliably funnels wealth upward and leaves the population scrambling to survive the consequences. And the most chilling truth of all is this: the pattern doesn't care whether the money is silver, paper, or digital. It doesn't care about ideology or borders. It doesn't care whether the rulers are emperors, kings, or elected officials. It only cares about control. If money is the bloodstream of society, then those who issue it are the unseen surgeons. And throughout history, they have always performed the same operation: tightening control until the body collapses. Patterns persist for a reason, and this one is far from finished. If the past were dead, we could dismiss it. But the past isn't dead. It's wearing a new mask. What Rome did with silver, what ancient China did with paper, what monarchs did with royal mints, modern governments now do with spreadsheets and keystrokes. The technology has changed, but the behavior has not. And when you overlay the old pattern onto the present, The lines match too perfectly to ignore. Inflation today is simply debasement with better branding. Instead of melting coins or diluting metals, modern authorities dilute purchasing power by expanding the money supply invisibly, cleanly, without ever touching a physical object. In Rome, citizens saw their coins becoming lighter. Today, we see the truth on grocery receipts, rent contracts, medical bills. The debasement has moved from the mint to the marketplace. The effect is identical. Your money buys less, and the people who create it face no consequences. Debt, too, has shifted forms, but not function. Ancient tax farmers squeezed citizens through collection quotas. Modern financial institutions do it with interest schedules. In the past, rulers kept populations stable by keeping them indebted. Today, households finance education, housing, transportation, healthcare. 4 pillars of life, all mortgaged to a system that profits from their dependency. The names are different, but the mechanism is the same. Debt as a leash, tightening quietly year after year. Even the architecture of power mirrors the past. Feudal lords controlled land. Central banks control liquidity. Monarchs granted charters to favored merchants. Today's governments grant bailouts to favored institutions. Imperial treasuries manipulated currency to maintain authority. Modern policymakers do the same under the language of stability, stimulus, and soft landings. It is the ancient hierarchy dressed in modern credentials. The most haunting parallel, though, is psychological. Throughout history, societies experiencing monetary decay share the same emotional undercurrent: confusion. People know something is wrong, deeply wrong, but they can't locate the source. They blame themselves. They blame their jobs, their spending, their luck. They believe they're failing privately, not realizing they're suffering collectively. That psychological fog is not accidental. It's the byproduct of a system designed to shift responsibility downward while power concentrates upward. Look at the modern world through the lens of history, and everything sharpens into focus. Rome's daily grain distributions look like modern welfare programs meant to stabilize a strained population. China's runaway printing echoes today's stimulus injections. Europe's currency crises resemble the slow erosion of middle-class purchasing power across developed nations. When wages stagnate but asset prices explode, you're not witnessing the market. You're witnessing the same transfer of wealth that has preceded every major societal fracture. The parallel extends further. Elites today, like elites of every era, sit on assets that benefit from debasement. When currencies weaken, stocks, land, and commodities rise. The rich don't outrun inflation. They feed on it. And the public doesn't lose by accident. They lose because they hold the only form of wealth that the system constantly erodes: cash. People think we're living in an unprecedented moment, but that assumption is the most dangerous illusion of all. Because if this moment were truly new, maybe it would correct itself. But it isn't new. It's ancient. It's familiar. It's the same choreography of decay that has toppled countless civilizations, only now accelerated and global. The frightening realization is that we're not witnessing a deviation from history. We're watching history reassert itself, loudly, unmistakably, and without mercy. And if the parallels are accurate, the next stage is not stability. It's revelation. There comes a moment in every collapsing system when the mask slips, when the comforting narrative can no longer cover the machinery beneath it. And in that moment, something becomes unmistakably clear. None of this was accidental. The erosion of your savings, the inflation that eats your time, the debt that chains entire generations, these aren't side effects. They are features. They are the intended outcome of a system designed not to elevate the many, but to empower the few who sit closest to the creation of money itself. For centuries, we imagined the elite as distant, almost mythical figures: monarchs, emperors, conquerors. But the modern elite operate in quieter rooms. They wear suits instead of crowns, issue statements instead of decrees, and manipulate monetary policy instead of armies. Their power isn't loud, it's structural. They do not need to command you. They only need to control the environment you live in, the value of your money, the cost of your life, the scarcity of your options. This is the revelation. The modern monetary system was built to extract, not to enrich. Central banks create currency out of nothing, a privilege so extraordinary that most people don't fully understand its implications. Governments spend without limit, pushing the consequences onto the population through inflation rather than taxes. Financial institutions expand credit endlessly, knowing the system will bail them out long before it ever helps the citizens who fund it. All of them, banks, governments, institutions, participate in the same quiet siphoning of wealth upward. They don't steal your money outright, they simply make it worth less. And every time they weaken the currency, your labor weakens with it. The hours you worked last year, the sacrifices you made last decade, the savings you dutifully put away, all of it dissolves, so they can continue expanding their power. This is not incompetence, it is strategy. Because a population struggling to stay afloat has no time to resist, no energy to question, no strength to build independence. And so, the extraction continues. But theft alone doesn't maintain power. Power requires belief, specifically your belief in the system that exploits you. That's why they surround you with comforting myths. Inflation is normal. Debt is necessary. The economy is too complex for ordinary people to understand. Trust us. These myths are the modern equivalent of royal decrees. They keep you compliant. They keep you hopeful. They keep you blaming everything except the structure itself. What makes this revelation so devastating is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. You notice how every crisis conveniently strengthens the institutions that caused it. You notice how every fix transfers more control upward. You notice how every new policy deepens your dependence on the very system that's draining you. And you begin to understand the most uncomfortable truth of all. Wealth was never meant to trickle down. Only control was. Because if ordinary people became truly wealthy, they would not need the system. They would not need the loans, the subsidies, the rescues, the promises. They would not need the institutions that have positioned themselves as guardians of stability while manufacturing instability behind the scenes. The revelation is simple, but its implications are enormous. The people who control the money do not want you to escape the gravitational pull of their design. And yet, once a population recognizes the architecture of its own captivity, history shifts. Empires weaken, regimes crack, systems fall. Revelation is always the turning point, the moment before inevitability. Once the truth is visible, it becomes impossible to return to the old illusions. You can no longer pretend that money was designed to lift you, that saving alone will protect you, that the system will somehow correct itself out of benevolence or wisdom. But revelation is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of clarity. And clarity, even when it's terrifying, is the first step toward freedom. Because here is the paradox. Money was never meant to make you rich. And yet, that realization is the only thing that can. When you stop expecting the system to save you, you begin looking for exits instead of promises. You begin to see the difference between wealth that endures and wealth that melts. You begin to understand that real security comes not from what you are given, but from what you build, own, and control outside the machinery that extracts from you. Every collapsing civilization eventually reaches this stage, the moment when people wake up, not in panic, but in awareness. They start to ask different questions. What if the system's rules weren't written for me? What if the path to stability isn't inside the structure, but beyond it? What if the future belongs not to the compliant, but to the sovereign? Throughout history, the individuals who survived monetary decay were never the ones who trusted the currency. They were the ones who trusted themselves. They held assets the system couldn't dilute. They acquired skills no inflation could erase. They built independence in an age of dependence. They stepped outside the gravitational pull of the collapsing monetary star, and in doing so, they created their own orbit. And that is the inevitability. Once a system exposes itself, people begin to migrate away from it. Some turn to hard assets, land, metals, energy, productivity. Others turn to decentralized forms of money the elite cannot manipulate. Still others invest in knowledge, networks, and disciplines that cannot be confiscated or inflated away. Every escape route looks different, but the instinct is the same. Reclaim what the system taught you to surrender. But inevitability cuts both ways, because while individuals awaken, the system tightens. It always has. As currencies weaken, governments expand control. As trust erodes, institutions demand obedience. As people move toward sovereignty, the elite move toward consolidation. This push and pull is not chaos. It is the final phase of every monetary cycle, the struggle between those who built the system and those finally breaking free of it. And yet, despite the darkness, something luminous appears in moments like these. Possibility. Collapse is not just destruction. It is the clearing of ground. It is the moment when the stories that once imprisoned us lose their power. It is the moment when ordinary people realize they were never ordinary at all. They were simply playing a game that was never meant to let them win. You cannot stop the cycle, but you can step out of it. You can refuse to let your time be drained by a currency designed to decay. You can refuse to let your identity be shaped by a system that profits from your dependence. You can refuse to hand your future to people who have already sold it. Money was never meant to make you rich, but you were never meant to stay blind. And once enough people see the architecture for what it is, the cycle that has ruled empires, kingdoms, and nations for thousands of years begins to crack. Because no system, no matter how sophisticated, can survive a population that finally understands the game. In the end, inevitability is not collapse. Inevitability is awakening. And once a society wakes up, the world that controlled them begins to tremble.